The most popular sword in Roblox, or a random damage part. Everything is better with a dash of floating text. And here's how you do it. We'll start by creating a billboard GUI. It will represent a template for one type of damage that we're gonna use. Of course, we're gonna need a text label. Make sure the billboard is set to be always on top. Let's make it transparent. Let's set the color to white, but you can do whatever you want. As long as there is a text label, we're good. For something like damage, bold font works best. Let's add a stroke on it, otherwise you cannot see white text on a white character. I'll name this regular damage and move it to replicated storage. I'll make a copy of this template, move it to workspace and make a template for critical damage. I'll bring the template back, and it's time to do some scripting. Let's start with a new module script in the replicated storage, and let's call it floating text. The way I like to do it is I kind of like to define empty functions with parameters that I'm gonna need, so I have a clearer picture of what the general interface of using this module is gonna be. We'll use the register template, as the name suggests, to register different templates that we're gonna use for our text. For show text, we're gonna need a target, something on top of which we're gonna display the text. We're gonna need a template key and the text itself. And the last function is gonna be send to client. The idea behind it is that most of the time we calculate things like damage on the server, and we need a convenient way to send that damage display to a client. Let's define a variable where we're gonna store the templates. Store the template. Let's make sure it's disabled. Because we're gonna use object pooling, we need to also define a variable for the pool. And create an empty array in pool for that template. Let's move on to show text. Here we need to protect against invalid target, because between server sending an event and client receiving it, target might be deleted. To show text, we need an instance of our template. We can get it by removing it from the pool. In Lua, table.remove also returns the value that's being removed. But initially the pool is empty, so we need to clone it from the template. By default, when player character dies, Roblox deletes GUI elements. To prevent that, we set reset on spawn to false. Otherwise, our pool would become an array of empty values. To make text visible, we need to parent it to something. In this case, I prefer player GUI. Because the script will be used on both client and server, we need to make sure that we look for player GUI only when a player object exists. We need to find the text label within our template. Add true to make sure it goes deeper to find it. To make sure text follows the target, assign it to this French thing. I don't know what this is. Of course, we need to enable the GUI. Enabling makes it visible. When we use that underneath thing, the position of our text is relative to that target. So we can kind of set the position to 0, but it's good to have some control on the vertical offset in case you want damage to be displayed above head. We'll control the position of our text object by changing the studs offset wall space. The most optimal way to animate multiple objects is by having them in one array and then iterating them each frame. So we need to store all data about currently animated objects in one place. Let's define the data type, which is not really necessary, but it makes working with it easier. Let's define more variables for our animation. We'll use gravity to simulate text falling down. Lifetime will be the duration of the animation. And spread will control the horizontal movement. Let's actually use the type. So with that being done, we can finally add data to our animations list. Velocity is the initial speed at which the text will be flying up. We want x velocity to be between minus and plus spread. At this point, I'm not sure if this graph makes things easier or more difficult to understand. Set y velocity to 10. If it's less than gravity, it means that the text is gonna fall down a bit. For z, let's put in a random number. We could put in 0, but we would have issues with clipping if we had multiple texts floating at the same place. To start working on send-to-client function, we need first to define a remote event. I'll just pick it from a child of this script. So we need to create one. To the event, we basically need to pass all the same arguments that we get in this function. There's a neat little trick on how to do that, but you kind of lose types of the arguments, so I wouldn't really recommend it. I'm not sure why I did it here, so yeah. So the last thing that we need in the script is the animation logic itself. For that, I've included a run service. We need to make sure that this is only running on client. Connecting to heartbeat allows us to have a function which will be called every frame of the game. We need to iterate through all of the active objects. In this case, we are iterating backwards so that we can remove elements as we are iterating. We need to increase the elapsed time. And with that, handle cases where elapsed time has reached the lifetime. Instead of destroying our elements, we are gonna put them into our pool. And remove them from an active array. Here we're gonna do the actual animation. So we start by applying gravity to our velocity. Then apply that velocity to our position and update position of UI element. We also need to make sure that we are listening to the event from a server. So the main script is pretty much done. To test if it works, let's create a local script in starter player scripts. We can call it whatever we want, we won't be referencing it. Let's import our floating text module. And get references to all the templates that we made. Registering templates is pretty straightforward. Let's add some code which would display our text when we press a button on a keyboard. I'm not sure why I did P instead of T. Since we have templates for both regular and critical damage, let's write some code to randomly display either one of them. Alright, let's get to play and see if it works. Nice. Now let's see how to use it with other assets. We'll need a target. I guess Noobman will do just fine. Let's add a sword. I'm not sure how this one is the most popular. Add it to a starter pack. And open up the script. Add the reference to our floating text module. Find the place where it does damage. And let's do a similar thing to what we did in our local script. Make sure you pick up the correct player object. In this case is the uppercase P. Because humanoid is not an object, we'll use its parent as a target. And we're done. Let's see if it works. All good. Let's try it on something else, like a damaged part. Let's open up its script, include our floating text module, here we don't have a reference to our player, so we'll need to get it from player service. The script seems to be using spaces instead of tabs, so the whole text is jumping all over the place. Not the prettiest work, but it will work. It does work, but white text doesn't look too good here. So behind the scenes I made a different template for self-damage. Much better. Right now our floating text follows the target, but sometimes you don't really want that. So let's try and change it. Add a variable so that it's easy to change when we need it. Now let's make both options work. A trick here is to use something that's static and always there. We can use workspace.terrain. It works even if there is no terrain. Our start position can no longer be 0, 0, 0. We need something more absolute, like the exact position of a target. Here we just check if it's a model. If it is, we get pivot. If it's not, we get just the position. We also need to add the vertical offset that we defined previously. Alright, so text is no longer following us, so it seems to be working well. And that's the end of the tutorial.